Hey everyone, and welcome to Writers Drinking Coffee. This is a podcast of a bunch of writers who sit around, drink, and talk about writing, publishing, and the whole creative process. We do not censor ourselves, so consider us PG-13. Today's Peanut Gallery are John Schmidt, David Welsh, Raymond Miller, and me, Jeannie Warner. This is episode 78. What's in a quirk? I got started thinking about quirky characters. What makes a character quirky by what makes them fun? So a dictionary definition, characterized by peculiar or unexpected traits. They used an example. Her sense of humor was decidedly quirky, aka clearly I'm in the dictionary. But I wanted to talk about this with you guys because I've been looking at older stuff that I've read and evaluating some of my characters that I've written with maybe new eyes. Like when we are playing role-playing games, you can reduce every character, every being on the planet in any word. Catch a person you want in the street, you can turn them into a gaming character sheet. You have strengths, you have advantages, disadvantages, skills, but quirks are kind of what make them fun. And I submit that a lot of characters can be most fun because of the quirks. And the things when I did a little bit more research are, I don't think it's used evenly, and I wanted to explore quirks in a more general setting. So, Dave, you can be a quirky person, right? You're a little eccentric.
Sure. We're talking about like fictitious characters, right?
Well, I was actually talking about anybody on the street of what makes a person quirky. I like wearing weird costumes. I don't like showering with spiders.
No, who does?
Hey.
I didn't burn a house down, but, you know.
That would be a quirk, liking to shower with spiders.
Jane from Firefly always wore the same hat that his mom made him. That could be a quirk. It's his signature fashion thing, you know?
As a man walks down the street wearing that hat, you know he ain't afraid of nothing. Certainly not looking like a fool.
Exactly.
So I'm going to have to distinguish between being quirky, which is often almost an insult, and quirks, which you find very endearing, and say that a lot of the poetical connotation of quirkiness, rather, not denotation, sorry, is that they're weird because of that. And the reality is it's a good way to highlight the corners of your character. So let's say, for instance, you have a serial killer. But the serial killer, to calm themselves,
I'm right here.
Crochets. Or, for that matter, knits, or when they're bored and standing around, the thing they do with their hands is take the wrappers of the gum they're chewing and folds it into little origami figures. And I'm sure you know what that example's from.
I do.
And that little detail, does it reveal you something about the character of the character of the character? Yes, it does. But it doesn't drive the story forward as much as it gives them a human, or, depending on the kind of character, inhuman moment. It puts the lotion on the skin, or else we're being all quirky again.
Well, that it is exactly that strange mix of traits, like that make a character interesting or charming, because sometimes they can be just an asshole. And I was considering one of the favorite leading men and main heroes of any story ever, they all say, is Indiana Jones. The man's kind of a bastard. Yeah. This was going out and looking at top 10 heroes, top 10. It was like, he only became human when he leaned back over snakes. Why did it have to be snakes? Right?
Right.
Because other than that, he was the standard, I am going to go steal things from Native American artifacts, locations, to bring them back to civilization and put them in.
Not Native American. Come on. He was any original civilization.
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
So my question to you, is a quirk automatically a weakness?
Well, see, I didn't think it was. I just think these are the things that make it interesting. What is unconventional? What separates this character from other characters that make them more interesting, kind of interesting, charming? I think quirky is growing in popularity. I mean, the best sheriff of Nottingham was Cancel Christmas, right?
With a spoon.
Nope, it's not good. I lost it.
So I was looking at the different purposes of quirks. For instance, If you said,
Oh, yeah, I've got it now.
I'm going to write a series. Well, you have to hold it now. You have to hold it.
No,
I'm on a roll.
Oh, Jeannie, go.
I hold the speaking stick. If you're writing a series, like I'm planning to write 10 to 12 books or all of the detective novels, the Nero Wolfe, the Sherlock Holmes, quirks are what kind of string them all together. He always wears a deerstalker hat and smokes a calabash pipe. The game is afoot. Elementary, my dear Watson. These are the little hooks that are Quirk, that are different than other people around him, that say this is a Sherlock story no matter what. Okay, go.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating because he only wears a cap, the deerstalker cap in the movies. He doesn't wear them in the books. That character trait was added in a different media. But over to Dave. Go, Dave. Go.
Okay, going back to you're talking about quirks becoming more popular and more, I don't know, accepted. I see a correlation with geek culture. I think that quirks, to a large extent, help geeks identify with characters in some fashion. I mean, it starts, you can think of all kinds of science fiction and fantasy examples, but, you know, almost any geek culture has its own in-jokes, and a lot of those are quirks of character.
They are. And I can back up, and I was looking at classic older characters. I was looking, starting at the black and white characters, saying, okay, Green Hornet had a sidekick named Kato, who was played by Bruce Lee, as we all know in the TV series.
Right.
And this was a cool-ass character. So much so that I think I wasn't sure which Kato came first, the Green Hornet sidekick or Inspector Clouseau's sidekick. But
pretty sure the Green Hornet.
And now you're equating a parody to a quirk, because I thought the Pink Panther's sidekick was a parody of, because the Pink Panther himself is a parody of other detectives.
Especially Hercule Poirot. But Kato attacking him at random is the quirk of there. You know, he's an absent-minded klutz, but he's the hero, right? Mm. So I started saying, all right, I like your idea of the pop culture, because let's look at Star Wars. You ever played the Star Wars drinking game? Every time Luke Skywalker whines, you take a shot. Every time R2-D2 says something that you're pretty sure is profanity, you take a shot.
Look, we're all still alive, so we obviously weren't playing it with hard alcohol.
Obviously. Huh.
James Bond is chock full of quirks. And I went back and looked at, do you remember the TV Avengers, the One True Avengers, black and white, Emma Peel?
Yes.
There was a quirk that I noticed by binging one afternoon, that if they enter a room that is empty, but has a decanter and glasses set up, they are compelled to pour themselves a glass of alcohol and drink it.
No matter where they are.
No matter where they are. And by the third time I realized this is how I would poison them, I would just observe this.
Right.
But it was a quirk. They always did it.
Yeah.
That's kind of
so
genius.
What's the borderline between quirk and, I mean, because you're equating all these things to what's interesting in a character, but I mean, there has to be some dimensionality to the character. Quirks, to my mind, are just these little rough edges hanging off the edge of the character. They're not the core of the character. When they become the core of the character, then they're something other than quirks, aren't they?
I don't know if I can agree with that, because it seems to me I could take certain heroes, they're just templates off of each other, right? Until we give them certain quirks. Isn't every detective really Sam Spade? Well, some of them don't drink, and some of them have 8 wives, and some of them can't fight or are cowards. So I don't know. Maybe a quirk helps us to see the familiar, but give us enough differentiation to enjoy the rest of the story without having feel we've been here before.
Exactly so. I was thinking that in terms of Jack Ryan and some of the heroic American was in blah, blah armed forces and now is in private life and is solving, inner country, this and that. I find those characters incredibly dull after a while, because they're all the same. You could dump this out and put this one in, and, if you added James Bond, and a sexy accent and a tuxedo, it's a Bond movie. And it's interesting because it is a Bond movie because he has specific quirks. Whereas a lot of the other ones, the Mission Impossibles, the Jack Ryans, these and the others, they all blur together for me. And I remember thinking about it, that they don't have any quirks.
It sounds like a chicken and egg problem, though. Is James Bond great because he's quirky, because he's a part of a culture that everybody kind of digs? And it's this geek culture thing again, right? Well, he's popular. Is he popular because he's different? I mean, for every James Bond that makes this enormous franchise, there are 100 similar characters that aren't badly written, that have quirks that just don't happen to catch on.
I've got to draw you a parallel. Remember how we just said Sherlock Holmes, the hat, the game is afoot, elementary, my dear Watson. Mm-hmm. What 3 lines are in every James Bond movie?
I'd like a weak martini.
Shaken, not stirred.
Shaken, not stirred. Bond, James Bond.
007, someone says, is he, at the end of the movie because, they're filming him getting down.
Well,
right?
There is always a woman who says, "Oh, James."
Yes, that is true.
Always.
That is
true.
There?
Those 3 lines are in every James Bond movie, and we look for them, and we feel, and that's in a lot of ways, no matter, they can make James Bond be played by any actor in the world, hoping for Idris Elba, but that's a personal, anyway.
Aren't we all? Aren't we all?
Yes. But any of those things, because once you add those 3 lines and a few other things, you have a James Bond movie, which is distinct from others because they use the same hooks as the same character, saying this is a James. Whereas you don't have that.
That doesn't make it interesting. You can have a shitty James Bond movie. Now we're talking about formula.
Well, okay, so
formula has a bad name. It's not always bad, but in this case, that's all you're talking about is
right. But you just said you have a bad James Bond movie. The whole point is whether it's good or bad, it's still a James Bond movie. We recognize it. But I have to kick in and say that I don't think James Bond is kind of a fair comparison. If you take, he was the first of whatever this line of movies are, and the most famous. So if we did something, say, pulled back to the one with Matt Damon. Born Identity. Right? Yeah. And so we have, how many times we've seen somebody, they're back against the wall, they have to solve the problem, they lost their memory, total recall, this, that, and the other. That's a genre of the movie to where, we could name 12 of these between the 4 of us, but what differentiates them is the different quirks, right? So we recognize James Bond as an archetype, and again, it's not fair to compare James Bond, but if we pull back to something a little less famous and look at the archetypes, and I could say the same thing, say about Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee was the first, well, maybe not exactly the first, but the most famous of the, I'm Asian, this is the art I do, I'm going to whoop everybody's ass in the room. Once you get past Bruce Lee, then you look at all the others, and the only way to bring the difference, Chow Yun-fat, Jackie Chan, is the quirks in each of the characters.
You're equating actors with characters, which bothers me. And
if you're playing the same guy over and over, I mean, come on. Every Jackie Chan movie, most every Jackie Chan movie is him playing Jackie Chan. Nicolas Cage, they all have certain characteristics that these characters share.
Right, but I'm not. I think they go beyond being quirks. I mean, a Jackie Chan movie is a Jackie Chan movie because Jackie Chan has his sense of humor. He has the acrobatics that he learned.
These are. I would say those are not quirk. Yeah, let's look at the Mission Impossible movies for an apples to apples.
Okay.
Mission Impossible, same dude all the way through. Mm-hmm. Fucking can't tell them apart. Sorry, Hollywood, but there's 6 movies. Can't tell which comes before what or anything that happened. They have no common lines in it. He is literally a character without many quirks. What made the TV series such a great quirk was this tape is going to self-destruct. And that was what we expected out of every episode. But it's not really there, is it, in the movies anymore?
That's interesting. So now we're blurring the line between quirks of a character and quirks of the story itself, or what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
of
Genre?
I guess the story, right? So
No, it's a point. It's a repeating motif. There's a musical leitmotif.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Motif is the kind of the word I'm looking for.
And I use it as quirky because it's unconventional. We had never heard of such a thing. This tape will self-destruct in 20 seconds. It was a device. It was new. It had never been seen before. It was unusual. It was a hook.
Mm-hmm.
And
Which makes that spy show different from the other spy shows that you watch.
yeah, quirks can
The
give you that
quirks.
continuity.
Or did at the
It's
time
ancient.
anyway.
So here I am.
Well.
If I am writing a historical, let's say I wanted to tap in and make a ton of money by writing a historical fantasy romance.
Yes.
How do I make my strapping, sweaty, half-naked barbarian different from every other strapping, sweaty, half-naked barbarian?
Well, they could knit.
He could knit.
Does
Exactly.
anybody remember Rosie Greer?
Rosie Greer.
Rosie Greer was a football player in the 70s.
Oh,
Thank
yeah.
you, because all I could think of was Pam Greer for some odd reason.
Because who doesn't want to think about Pam Grier? Okay, moving on.
Please.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing was he did needlepoint.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
And he also wrote, I thought. But yes, he had,
and in an age of toxic masculinity, nobody gave him shit about it.
yeah. Well, I started when I was, and then I looked up on Goodreads because I love Goodreads for being the namey characters and you can search for anything. And I went for quirky characters and I found quirky heroines. There was like 16 quirky hero. I mean, and the best one was, I have to read it to you guys because it was hilarious. Cletus Winston is a puzzle wrapped in a mystery covered in conundrum sauce. And now he's in a pickle. Despite being convinced of his own omniscience, extortion by the exalted banana cake queen of Green Valley has taken him completely by surprise. What's a maniacal mastermind to do? So that was all in Beard Science, which I now have to read because it was shelved 4 times and called a quirky hero. But that was quirky, just plain wackadoodle fun quirky, as opposed to I went out and said, all right, quirky heroine. And instead of the 50 entries, there were 970 entries.
Whoa.
That's a lot.
970 entries?
Yes. Same, quirky hero, do a search, quirky heroine, do a search. Very interesting that I'm starting to wonder if quirky, do you guys feel that the word quirky is associated with feminine the way it is with Rosie Greer? Oh, you had quirks. He knitted.
No.
Evidently. I mean,
You've got proof there.
Well,
exactly.
I don't feel that, but that's kind of meaningless in the face of that level of proof.
I wouldn't say proof. I'd say evidence. But you bring up an interesting point as a tangent, which of course I'm going to grab onto because I do tangents. So one of the characteristics of a quirk is that it's unexpected, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, one of the characteristics of comedy is that it's unexpected. So quirks are very often comedic, and that in a lot of cases is used to draw the reader or the viewer in, right?
That's a really good point.
Absolutely. Again, back to cut his eyes out
I mean,
with the spoon, cancel Christmas. It was funny, and that grabbed us.
Or literally surprised as Cato jumps out at Peter Sellers one more time. And, it's funny the first time because it's unexpected. It's funny the second time because it's expected. So that's genius comedy right there.
That is genius comedy.
Exactly.
If I don't know, if I can go back to, get off the tangent just for a little while, it seems to me that maybe these female characters have certain expectations of them. I want the women in my story to be X. And once they exhibit, characteristics outside that, now it's quirky. And it might just be normal characteristics, but because, as a, narrow-minded reader or whatever, there's not the X I expect, right? Why is she not married by such and such age? Or, she doesn't like kids and children and she can't change a diaper. What kind of woman is this? Anything that's outside the quote unquote norm. I mean, not that I support it. I'm just, just an example. Now you got quirky. Whereas, I'm not going to write a James Bond. At no point is he going to actually deal with any children because that's just not part of the genre. So it never comes up, so maybe there's,
and it's beautiful that you
rooted
said
deeply
that
in sexism.
because that takes me in an interesting place. So I want to throw some fun characters out there, and you guys tell me quirky or not quirky. You ready?
Uh-huh.
Context is everything.
Monsieur Gustave, the Grand Budapest Hotel.
Oh, quirky.
Yes, I'd have to say quirky.
He is a man's man. He is poetry. Everybody says he's gay, but he's not. He sleeps with women. Dandified and cultured and yet oddly vulgar. So things that didn't go together. I thought of him as kind of quirky.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Snake Plissken, Escape from New York.
Huh.
That's kind of a special case, in my opinion.
Okay.
It's not really quirky. It was a cheaply and formulaically done film that happened to work really well just because of the chemistry or something at the time and became a cult classic. But I really don't think there's any one thing that's really special there.
Huh. I'd have to say
Some fun writing once in a while, but other than that, yeah. Kurt Russell is basically just channeling John Wayne. I mean, that's about as lazy as it gets.
Well, can you think of any moments where John Wayne played kind of quirky characters?
Oh, God.
John Wayne always played, well, if you think he was quirky, he always played John Wayne.
He played John Wayne as a Western cowboy, John Wayne.
Well, and he also
Which was
played
fun when
John
he played
Wayne as
Genghis
a,
Khan.
Yeah.
He also played John Wayne as a army sergeant and as a CB and as a, just the tough masculine hero.
Well, even looking later, okay, we have the 80s. We have everybody's laid back. As a practicing dudist, I have to bring up the Big Lebowski. That is one quirky dude. Drinks White Russians, wears sunglasses.
Hey, that carpet really tied the room together.
Really tied the room together.
And is there anyone in that movie who isn't simply all quirk?
Yeah.
Although that can be said of anyone in any Coen movie. Dapper Dan. I'm a Dapper Dan man. Okay.
Well, but the quirks kind of integrate into a more, well, if not three-dimensional, then at least two-dimensional, 2.5-dimensional character. It's not just that the quirk. I mean, I think another way to think of quirks, and you started out with gaming. Another way to think of quirks, and I, as somebody who writes role-playing games or role-playing game scenarios, a quirk is a way to add interest to a one-dimensional character so that they're not entirely one-dimensional, but it's not something that you're going to base an important character on, right? It's something that you're going to throw in for flavor. So, I mean, in some ways, it's kind of like formula. It's kind of a way to cheat, or at least to save yourself a lot of effort in designing a character that really isn't going to spend a lot of time on stage anyway.
So here's a challenge for all of you to ponder for a moment of silence. Think of your immediate family. Are there any of them that don't have quirks? I submit to you, I think quirks make people real.
And I submit to you that quirks are emergent properties of their personalities and can't be separated from them if you're going to define them that way.
Yes.
I submit that you fell into a rhetorical trap again. Snakes. Why does it all have to be logical snakes?
You did beautifully, and that was the funny thing.
In violent agreement.
We're in violent agreement, and then I was finding that the word itself was so branded for people because, as I said, quirky heroines, tons of them, gazillion, 970, quirky heroes, 50. And so that's where I started looking at all of them, thinking random. I just went randomly looked up movies. Do you not remember the movie Hero, Dustin Hoffman, Gina Davis, Andy Garcia?
No,
but that's okay.
It's Gina Davis is a reporter. The rough thing, blah, blah. She gets injured. She gets rescued by somebody she doesn't quite remember who. Andy Garcia takes credit for it, and she's going to reward him. And it turns out the guy who helped her was sort of a con man, sly street, looks like a street guy, Dustin Hoffman, who did the actual heroic bits of. And it makes you say, what is a hero? What is not a hero in a lot of ways, because everyone's a little quirky. They don't call anybody quirky, though, because I think the word has frosting on it that people are used to oh, she's just a quirky girl that doesn't like babies, as opposed to a guy that doesn't want to be a hero, or a guy that is heroic but is willing to compromise his ethics and lie in order to go for a greater good. Is it a quirk?
Well,
No,
word quirk itself, it starts with a Q. I mean, how can you not look at it sideways?
Exactly. Or Local Hero by Bill Forsyth was an oil guy, was sent by like Burt Lancaster to just go buy a Scottish village. And he ends up there and he falls in love with these entire village full of quirky people in a certain way. And the local hero, I love that it's very unsure who the hero is going to be in this story. Is it him? Is it one of the villagers? Everyone's quirky. Hancock by Will Smith, the movie, not by Will Smith, the superhero.
Will Smith.
Quirky.
Hancock, the character played by Will Smith, yeah.
Yeah, that's one quirky dude. But weirdly, I went and looked up and I couldn't find any description of Hancock, the superhero that ended up, trashing half of LA. Why don't we call him quirky?
I don't know. Never saw it.
But you're now alluding to quirky as always. It has a connotation of positive now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. These are minor changes that overall will make you laugh, that make you engaged, not little character flaws like, oh, I always have to bleed them from the carotid artery before,
Yeah.
cut them into mincemeat pies.
And I was just saying the different uses of quirks are, if I have a series, I can string it together with familiar little gem quirks that make the reader say, this is a James Bond story, or this is a Nero Wolfe story. I'm going to refer to him as a quarter of a ton. It can be a turn of phrase describing a character, but any of these things make it distinctively your character and special and different. And I'm kind of submitting that some of those, maybe they've been very successful and big blockbusters, but sometimes by lacking the quirks, I think they're not as interesting a character.
So one of my favorite examples of genre films that I always come back to is the kind of horror movie with a monster. And I, at one point, thought to myself, this is so dull. Nothing original can be done with this, right? And then I watched Tremors, and it was all brand new again.
Tremors is great.
I think I've talked about this before. The original movie, not the crap series they made out of it. But right. I mean, it was there wasn't anything particularly new. I mean, the mechanics of the monster and so forth were, but it's been done before, Dune, right, and so forth. But just the way it all fit together, there weren't any truly completely original elements to it, but it was arranged in such a way that it was funny and entertaining. And maybe that's what you're talking about.
Well, could be. I was thinking also, if you're writing a story in which there are a lot of characters, and so for here, I'm going to throw examples of I love caper films. I love The Italian Job and Ocean's 11. And for series, I love Leverage. Think Star Trek. Think anything that's got a group of people traveling through time in space. Each of them has to have quirks in order to be distinct in some way.
Well,
yes,
it goes back to gaming again. That's why you give the spear carriers quirks, right?
It does.
Otherwise, they're just spear carriers. They're just red shirts, right? I mean, and sometimes that's okay if there's an entire army that you need to wipe out. For God's sake, don't bother giving them personalities. What?
I was going to say, also, if anybody hasn't read John Scalzi's Red Shirts, you totally should. It's so hilarious.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, but driving on.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
No,
but
that was it.
It's like saying, if I was having, all right, I was going to say, I'm going to do a caper. I am going to pull a coup and run the United States. And my characters are Dave, I have John, I have Chaz, I have Karen, I have Jeannie, I have Raymond. Each of us has quirks. Each of us, and the more that I emphasize that, the more I make it, instead of just running a bunch of names, I've made it unique. I have to show something like every little vignette when they said Ocean's 11, they gave you a little picture of that person saying there might be a problem with availability as you get the character.
It wasn't that two points where a characteristic defines a character? Isn't that sort of a point in the Mission Impossible movies? Is where, his style because he always leaves a lot of hats on the ground, or
yeah.
And another one, and this is out of the realm of writing and into the realm of acting. Kurosawa, on analysis, apparently always asked his actors to pick one gesture that they would repeat to show that their character is having an emotion. And to quote the Seven Samurai, or to view the Seven Samurai, the monk character always rubs his head because he had it shaved. So you can see he's a thinking, contemplative sort of man because he rubs his head. And the thing that the Ronin does, the Toshiro Mifune character does, is always shrug his clothes into place on his shoulders, which means I have to do something now. I'm going to do something. Might be irritated, might be angry, might be tired, but for all his flaws, he was a very resolute character. For a drunken random person, when he decided to do something, it got done.
I love that. And to me, it's making me go back and say, especially when I was going through and looking at something that I wrote, started more than 10 years ago, saying, wow, I am missing quirks. I am missing what are the things that define this character that make them, what's the hook? What's the difference?
What's the hook?
How are they different than every other character in this book? Okay, this one's a priest. How are they different than other priests? This one is, and it just sort of is a something to think about, to bring into writing. And both as we analyze, why do I love this character so much? Yeah, it's the quirks. How do I then make my characters be loved by other people? Maybe I need some quirk. Quirks give continuity. Quirks give distinction in a really quick way.
Continuity, really?
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about continuities. You look at your favorite quirks from cartoons. Simpsons. No.
I see. Okay.
That's a good point.
Yes. Right. Right. I get it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a shorthand tie together. So moving from your note, actually, there's a lot of good notes in here. This is a great subject for a relatively beginning writer, which, as you may know, is an interest of mine, because it gives you a quick into a character. You can hold up a quirk to them and say, does this work for them? And you don't have to this is not life or death. This is not huge, but you can put something in and say, does it make them more the human or the inhuman being I want them to be? And I recommend that.
And perhaps maybe if you've got somebody that's been a little bit of an automaton and like an authority figure or something, maybe you need that moment where your character recognizes a quirk of their authority figure to say they become relatable. Because I think we're all little envelopes full of quirks when some of us let them out a little bit more than others. Some people keep themselves very tightly wrapped. We've all worked with people who just trying to be professional at all times and sober and responsible and dull as crap, right?
Yeah, I was thinking, speaking of dull as crap, I mean, you were talking about Mission Impossible. I can't think of a more generic action hero than Tom Cruise.
Well, I really liked The Edge of Tomorrow. I remember when you went to see that movie, Dave, you came home and I said, oh my God, they killed Tom Cruise like 100 times. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tom, if you ever listen to this.
Well, it wasn't because of his performance, though. I mean, he did, kind of the same thing he always does, but the premise was so good. And yeah, I mean, the premise of having him killed 100 times was funny, even the 100th time. So.
Well, it was the same as when Doctor Strange kept coming back because he'd created a little time loop. I can keep dying 1,000,000 times, but the point is I'm going to keep coming back 1,000,000 times. So it made for an interesting moment. Yeah. Well, yeah. Do you have any point of summary you can think about any of this? My point of summary is that I am now going back and looking at things that I've written and saying, do I show you quirks quickly enough? What are your thoughts?
Well, one thing that occurred to me just in this last little bit we were talking about is, you're going back and finding generic characters and giving them a quirk and seeing what it does. Sometimes that can entirely take over the character and define the character, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
It's not.
No, it's not. I have to answer the question for myself. Is it better to add the quirks after or build them in at the beginning? And I'm thinking I have to build mine in at the beginning. I'm plotting a series now, and if by the third book, the quirk that was introduced in book 1 becomes integral to the plot, that might be a direction I want to go in.
I do have to present a fantastic example of that in Terry Pratchett, in that a lot of times you would see throwaway ideas, throwaway characters, literal jokes and puns become central to stories later on as they explored the tropes that they embodied. And my God, the quirks made the character, and specifically Genghis Khan, who was put in just for what happens to a really good, muscly, sinewy barbarian. And of course, the joke with for Genghis there was, oh yeah, destruction, he can get it for you wholesale. A bad joke from an earlier age, and yet it led to meditations on Alexander and hubris and what do you do when all you can do is kill things and stay alive when you're 87 and the same thing for his joke that the little blue men, the Smurfs of his world, were P-I-C-T-Es, pixies, and they go on to become the stars of their own series of books. And over and over and over again, he took a cardboard cutout. I'm trying not to say archetype because what I really want to say is a cliche. Thank you. That's the word, a stereotype. And by adding just a little humor and staying with it, turned it into an incredibly powerful character, Lord Vetinari. That he embodies the rule of one man, one vote. He's the man, he has the vote.
Exactly.
So going back to your question, Ray, you don't have to plan for it. Serendipity is your friend as long as you're, my interpretation, speaking from the heart and actually even treating these stereotypes, thank you, Dave, as characters who have the right to a quirk. Oh my God! Now I'm standing here with a sign that says "Undead yes, unperson no," which of course was a Terry Pratchett quirk. He invented a zombie just for a joke in the newspaper, and the red shoe. And I can remember all these names because he became a policeman to fight for the rights of the undead.
I love it.
Oh, nice.
We will put links to the stories and the interesting things we've mentioned on this website, which is www.writersdrinkingcoffee.com. You can also find us on Facebook or Twitter. We answer email. We would love for you to write in and tell us your favorite quirks for characters or what you're doing with your own types to give them that special something different. You've been listening to Writers Drinking Coffee. Unexpectedly. A labor of love and unexpected enthusiasm put together by the hosts. Our main web support magic is brought to you by Deirdre Schween, and our sound engineer and backup web spider is David Welsh. Our intro music is Pretty Maid Milking a Cow, and our exit music is Breakfast with the Morning Person, both by Michael Ingberg. You can hear more from Michael Ingberg on manyhatsmusic.com. Our podcast sponsor is Eternally Jackal Designs and the Bean Scene Coffee Shop in downtown Sunnyvale. And hey, thanks for listening.